It's basic physics that when you get hit by an 18-wheeler, you're going to lose every time, bottom line.
Are you or your family at risk on the roads because truck drivers aren't following the rules about how long they're allowed to be behind the wheel? Well, that's what we're going to ask the lawyer on today's episode. Hi again, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com, and my guest is attorney Carson Runge with the Sloan Law Firm in Longview, Texas. Carson, thank you for making some time to help us out again today.
Hey, thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Let's start off with talking about regulations. I'm pretty sure there's plenty of regulations for truck drivers. Who regulates them? Is it federal? Is it state? Is it others? All of the above? Help us out there.
Well, it's both. It's both regulations from the federal level with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. They regulate the hours of service both on a daily basis and on a weekly basis for truck drivers. And those regulations have been adopted by each state. And so those regulations are enforced by both the federal and the state government.
What are those regulations, quickly?
Well, the regulations are pretty intensive and detail intensive. From a more global standpoint, what they do is they regulate how many hours a truck driver can work in a 7-day period. And they also regulate how many hours a truck driver can work in a 24-hour period. And they require certain types of hours for rest and breaks, both from a daily standpoint and a weekly standpoint.
Why is it so important to have those regulations, Carson?
Well, those regulations are vitally important. So the truck drivers who are operating 80,000 pounds at 60, 70, 80 miles an hour down our roadways have enough awareness to safely operate those vehicles. Driver fatigue has been seen and documented historically to be a major cause of wrecks. And when you have a driver who's operating at such speeds and with such weight, we've got to make sure as a community that those drivers are aware that they've had rest and that they can focus on operating that rig safely.
And in your experience, do you find that the trucking companies are pushing their drivers to at least maybe get up to that limit or exceed that limit sometimes?
Absolutely. There are some trucking companies who operate under the rules, and unfortunately our experience is that there are others who don't. And we've had several cases where through the discovery process in a lawsuit, we find the company is not regulating or monitoring their drivers at all with regard to hours of service, and in fact are encouraging them to create false logbooks or two logbooks, one for DPS and one that's real, showing how many hours that they've actually worked. And so it is a problem within the industry with motor carriers, these companies encouraging their drivers to drive while fatigued and tired.
And this may seem like an obvious question, but why would they encourage them to do that, Carson, if it's putting people at risk?
The obvious answer, and the answer that we continuously see, is money. I mean, the sooner that these motor carriers can deliver their load and pick up the next load, the more money they're making. And unfortunately, in the process, when these motor carriers encourage their drivers to drive while exhausted, to drive while fatigued, it's putting all of our safety at risk, and it's in the name of money.
You mentioned logbooks. I know back in the day it was a handwritten logbook, but isn't all that computerized now? And doesn't that eliminate any fraud?
Unfortunately, it doesn't. There are both electronic logbooks, and we still see some paper logbooks. And in both scenarios, there are ways to manipulate that data. Unfortunately, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration required most motor carriers to go to electric logbooks in an effort to prevent fraudulent logbooks or fraudulent documentation. And I think that for the large part, that's helped. But with anything, there are people who want to violate it are going to find a way to violate it. And unfortunately, some drivers and motor carriers have found ways to alter those electronic logging systems.
And I would assume those are very valuable pieces of evidence in the case of a wreck, and probably not voluntarily or easily turned over by the trucking companies.
Yeah, that's exactly right. When you or a loved one are involved in a wreck with an 18-wheeler, the 18-wheeler company is never going to voluntarily provide you their logbooks. The only way that you're ever going to have the opportunity to examine and review the logbooks is with a lawsuit. And there are certain processes that we follow within a lawsuit called written discovery, in which we request those logbooks, we obtain those logbooks, and to the extent the motor carrier won't voluntarily provide those, we file motions to compel with the judge and get the judge to order the motor carrier to provide those so we can review those and make sure that the motor carrier and the driver were following the hours of service regulations.
It would seem that having an attorney help you who is very well experienced in trucking cases would be really important, because there's always going to be something that most people might miss.
You're absolutely right. Having an attorney who has handled multiple 18-wheeler cases knows what to look for in the application and the driver's duties of due diligence when hiring and training and supervising a driver are key. Just like it's key when you have the opportunity to review the hours of service and the logbooks to make sure that the driver was following the regulations with regard to driving with rest and driving while aware.
Whenever we do one of these videos, Carson, a lot of the comments are, and I'm guessing coming from truck drivers, are the truck drivers get a bad rap and everybody thinks all truck drivers are driving unsafely. What do you say to that? What's your response to that? I mean, I know people don't come to you and hire you to say, hey, everything went great and I didn't have a problem. So what's your answer to that?
Well, I think that those drivers who are commenting hopefully are the ones following the rules. And like with any profession or industry or job, there are people in that industry who don't follow the rules. And for the truck drivers and the motor carriers that follow the minimum safety regulations found in the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, hats off. Thank you, and please keep it up. But unfortunately, our experience is that so many of these drivers and these motor carriers are taking shortcuts and violating these minimum safety standards that are there to make sure that my family, your family, and every other family that's utilizing a Texas highway or roadway or any roadway or highway in the United States is safe. And so, I'm here to make sure and to hold people accountable when they violate those minimum safety rules.
Because when they don't follow those rules, it can have tragic consequences.
Well, absolutely. Look, when you have a motor vehicle driven by families, whether it's a van or a car or even a truck, these 18-wheelers weigh 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 times what our passenger vehicles weigh. And it's basic physics that when you get hit by an 18-wheeler, you're going to lose every time, bottom line. And as a result, we've seen tragic consequences for children, for fathers, for mothers, for grandparents. And it's our mission to make sure that everybody understands that these are minimum safety rules. They must be followed, and it's for everybody's safety. And if you don't follow them, we are going to do everything in our power to find out and to hold you responsible and accountable.
Carson, thank you for your help. As always, I do appreciate it. It was good talking to you.
Good talking to you. Thank you very much for having me.
That's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been Texas attorney Carson Runge. If you want the very best information, or you'd like to be able to choose a lawyer that lawyers choose, make sure to go to askthelawyer.com. Also, please take a sec to like, share, and subscribe by hitting the button below. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com.